It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in to the Take Command podcast. That's Logan Paulsen. I am Craig Hoffman. Another practice in the books. We'll talk about Tuesday's practice today. They will be off today as you're hearing this, Wednesday, and then back in the saddle on Thursday. Logan, the first thing that stands out about practice on Tuesday is they weren't in pads. We were anticipating them being in pads. They continue to kind of adjust to everything here. That strike you as odd to go one day in pads, one day off? Or like, at what point do we start doing the, should they be in pads more conversation? What did you take out of that first thing that was different than we thought it would be?
Yeah, I mean, a little surprising. I'm sure there was some type of justification, whether, the high intensity stuff from the first day of pads. I actually, again, from the strength coach standpoint, it's probably smart. You have one acclimation day, you have one high day, with the pads, and then you kind of evaluate the data. And an easy way to manage load is just say, take the pads off. And I know that's becoming a much more common thing around the league, just in general. And I think it's smart because ultimately, like we talked about, you need healthy people to play football games. So if this ensures the health of the athlete, great. I also think they've moved the off day to tomorrow, which is probably another thing that is factoring in here. And then you get kind of a nice 2-day chunk. Hopefully both those days will be in pads. We'll see what happens. But, I think that it just seems to me from 1,000-foot view and some stuff that Dan said and, stuff just that, from the strength coach stuff, that they are being very, very mindful of load management and keeping these guys as healthy as possible. Because while the practices are short, like we talked about this a little bit today on the sideline, like they are very dense. There's a lot of repetitions, especially in teams. So even though time-wise they're not out there for very long, it'd be really interesting just to kind of like flesh out the evaluation of like how many yards they're getting per day, how many high-speed yards they're getting per day, because I think that would be very informative kind of regarding some of these decisions. For
sure. And to be clear, we don't have that data, but they do. Because of the GPS data that all these guys wear now, if you've seen kind of the sports bra looking things that the guys wear, it's a company called Stat Sports. In the backside of that garment is a small GPS tracker. And if you're at practice, you'll see one of the strength coaches take out that little piece, and then they go back and run all the data afterwards. But it tracks how fast guys are running, how long they're running. So they have all that data that they're helping make these decisions on. It's going to be interesting to see how they ramp up too, because the one thing I will say, Logan, in our conversation yesterday or earlier in the week on the show, is you talked about how different some of the technique work is when you have pads versus not. And they do eventually need to adjust to playing football in pads. I know so much of practice during the season isn't in pads at these days. Clearly coaches know how to do that adaptation, but that's when you're playing and you understand it on a week in, week out basis. You're in that rhythm versus you haven't put on the pads and played a football game since at least January. So I do wonder, at what point as a player you're like, man, I really want to get used to doing all the things that I'm practicing in football pads, because that's how we're going to ultimately play on Sundays.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't really have a good answer for you in terms of what this team wants. I've been a part of older teams in my career where it's like, yeah, we don't need to be in pads. And I was always a guy who wanted to be in pads as much as possible. I just felt like it helped me kind of assure that I was ready from a toughness mentality standpoint. It just kind of ensured that. But, when I played with, London Fletcher, obviously, for a couple of years early in my career, that dude, we didn't need to be in pads with that dude, or he didn't need to be in pads because he just knew he was tough. He knew the techniques. He was ready to go. It was locked in. So again, as we get more familiar with this team, I think we can figure out what is appropriate. I also think just in terms of today's structure, not really essential that they're in pads today. Today was kind of a 2-minute, third down, second and long emphasis. Obviously going to be more passing game emphasis today, as opposed to yesterday, which was predominantly team run, 9-on-7. I don't know if they did 9-on-7, but run focus in terms of the drill. So if there's a day to go no pads and go shells, like this is the day to do it. So, because we talked about those techniques, like if you're wearing those shells, it's still a pretty good look for pass pro, not having to move people off the ball as much. They did run the football a little bit. There were some clean looks, so I think they did get some good work in there. But I think this is something that this is why Dan gets paid the big bucks, is to kind of determine like where the team is at. I just had a really long conversation with Fred and Santana about what it means to be a good practice player on the Take Command podcast. No, that's this show on the Command Center podcast. Yep. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is like, the intensity that you practice with in and out of shoulder pads often mitigates some of the technical stuff, because if you're just going as hard as you can, when you put the pads on, you're going as hard as you can, and there's no drop off. So I do think this team, because of how hard they practice, I would assume they're going to be more okay than not. But again, that's where Dan, that's where AP, that's where Cliff and Joe Witt Jr., they need to kind of communicate and be like, hey man, we're having a hard time. Like for example, today in one of the run periods, there was a couple gashes by the offense. And so you say, maybe if you're Joe Witt, you say, hey Dan, like I know we're taking care of the guys today, but this next block, can we make sure we're in pads for the 2 blocks so we can make sure we're getting these run fits correctly, or we're taking on blocks correctly? And that's again where that kind of teeter-totter seesaw balance comes into play of, this is what's best physically for the players, but they're technically not doing it correctly, so we need to get more of this stimulus. And again, that's why the coaches get paid a lot of money.
Yeah, for sure. And it actually speaks directly to something that Dan talked about yesterday with, I'll use the big fancy word again, the periodization, where he said basically we plan out everything the entire training camp, and it starts from the end of, we want to get X amount of 2-minute periods, we want to get X amount of this, X amount of that, so that the guys are ready for September. And if we're going to do that, then we need to plan it out to make sure that we get all that stuff in by the time that we get to September. But this was kind of, I think, the cool, interesting nugget of a caveat that he dropped in there is, he goes, the first like 8 or 9 practices, we're basically going to stick to that script. And then we'll be evaluating the entire time and say, like, actually, this thing that we were going to spend more time on, we shouldn't, because we're not good at it and we're not going to use it. It's in terms of like specific schematic stuff, right? Like obviously it's not going to be like, hey, we're not going to use 2-minute. Yeah, the game dictates that you're going to. But like schematically, if you thought you were going to spend a lot of time on a certain thing and then you realize that your guys aren't that good at it, you're just going to throw it out. Like, let's not waste extra time because we put it in the plan at the beginning. Let's substitute in something that we like and that we want to get, we want to go from good to mastering. Like, let's make sure, or if this is something that we need for our offense or need for our defense and we're not doing it well, like maybe we need to do more of it. And so that shift in how they're practicing is going to come. Let's see, today was, I think, day 5 for unpadded. Actually, no, today was day 6, 4 unpadded, 1 padded. And then today was the 6th and 5th unpadded practice. And so I'm curious to see too how that kind of philosophy of schematically we need to do X, Y, Z, or we're shifting that, becomes also, hey, we need to do 7 more team run periods by the end of camp. We were going to do 5 of them unpadded, but we're really struggling. So let's make that 4 unpadded and 3 padded now. And like that's the kind of flexibility that you give yourself on the back end of training camp. But for now, they're still in that evaluation period of what they actually need to adjust later. And they're kind of sticking to the script.
Yeah. And again, I would defer to what Dan's words are there, because again, we're kind of making assumptions based on what he said and what we've observed at practice. But I do think they're already kind of leaning into some of that a little bit. And I do think it'll be interesting to see, kind of, especially with the joint practices coming up, like how practice structure changes, how emphasis change. And so, I agree. I think that's smart football coaching. That's smart management of the talent. And that's why those guys get paid a lot of money, right? Because it's like, we got to walk this razor's edge of making sure guys are fresh, make sure they know what's going on, make sure physically and mentally they're ready to go. And that's a delicate balancing act, because you're kind of spinning a lot of plates there. So, again, so far with regards to this thing specifically, the periodization of practice, I've been very impressed. I think, again, and it's not impressed because, like, oh, they're hitting all the right notes. It's up and down and up and down, and they're in pads, they're not in pads. It's because they've managed to keep they managed to do that, but also keep practice at a very high intensity. So that's ultimately what you're looking for if you're Dan and you're the staff. So they're doing a good job. But I think to your point, like, when do they start getting more reflective in terms of the things that technically they need to accrue? And that's why we're going to go to practice and keep watching, because those answers only get answered those questions only get answered the more we watch practice.
Yeah, for sure. And you talk about the intensity and the intentionality. There was one play today that stood out for me. That's kind of a great prime example. Obviously, there's a ton of plays, but it was one of those big runs by B-Rob, and Mike Sainer still runs down the field, 40 yards down the field. And it's one of those where, like, at the end of the play, defensive guys are always trying to punch the ball out. I remember we've talked in the past about how annoying you find that. But, like, it's what they do. And Sainer still is, like, full speed still, because it was pretty live actually at that point, even though it was way down the field, because like B-Rob got out, he got loose, and Sainer still punches the ball out. And that effort 40 yards down the field, and that strain, to use a word that you use a lot when you talk about this stuff, to just extend the plays makes each play that you're practicing more intense. And obviously the high speed running of, like, oh, he chased him 40 yards down the field, like, that accumulates over time. And so when we talk about practice intensity, it's not just like a thud, okay, everybody walk back to the huddle. It's like no, they're straining through the true, like, end of the play. Then they're on a run back to the huddle, and they're lined up and going again pretty quick. And so talk about that volume, that density, that ability to create a lot of work in a little bit of time, that I thought was a fun example of it today. And by the way, you get to talk about a rookie who is just, football wise beyond his years, making a play too during the team run period today.
Yeah, and maybe this is our next segment, Craig, honestly, is like talking about the ball security that you see in these drills, right? Because there's that play, then there's the one where Frankie Louvu punches the ball out on Zach Ertz. Great route by Zach, great completion by Jaden Daniels, I think. Really nice job for a first down. And as he's turning up, ball punches out, right? You see Dan, we talked about how Joe Witt Jr. came up to Tyler Owens the other day and was like, hey, man, your ball's got to come out. Today I saw Dax Milne make a really nice catch. He's working with Jeff Driscoll in the threes. Makes a really nice catch over the middle of the field. Kind of languidly tucks his shoulder through contact and then jogs to finish at the end of the period. And then who's the first person to come talk to him? It's Dan Quinn, talking about, hey, man, like, the ball is life. Like, tuck that thing in there, brace for contact, because we can go score here. And it was funny when I watched the drill, I was like, man, like, that's close, to being a touchdown. And again, it's the end of the period, the whistle blows. I understand there's a lot of variables going on there, but you mentioned intentionality, and I think it's cool to see that execution. There's another play where Cleveland Farrell literally runs, it must have been 50 yards, 55 yards at a full speed sprint to try and get hands on the football and punch it out. He's part of the International Pathways program, number 68. He's very tall. He's 6'8". He plays defensive tackle. There's plays where he's not a fast person, but he is booking it to the football. And just to see, Jamin Davis had one where they threw the ball to the flat today, catch the ball working up the sideline, and he's sprinting up the sideline after this guy and mimicking the punch on the football. Davis, the corner, punched on the football today. And I just thought, like, this is so cool to see it from a third-party perspective, not be in the room, but see how this thing that Dan always talks about, ball is life, it's all about the ball. You start to see it come alive, and you start to see guys buying into it with this intensity you're talking about in practice, the focus, the intentionality, all those things coming together. And again, I've been a part of a lot of good practices, but that, as a coach and a fan of football, makes you feel really excited about the direction this thing is going. And there's still a long way to go, a lot of practices left, and it's not just one person, but it's starting to become a cultural identity, which is also really cool.
Yeah, and so that was definitely one of the notes I had for today, because there were a couple of forced fumbles, which, good on the defense, bad on the offense. That is the nature of a practice when you're evaluating both sides of the ball through the lens of one team, and you're like, okay, well, they're both ultimately on the team that we're evaluating here. So are we going yay or are we going boo on this? And the answer is both. But I think it was interesting today too to watch that happen, because while I think the secondaries played a lot better, generally speaking, than what we saw last camp, they definitely have not had the interception production that I think a lot of us were hoping to see, and certainly still hope to see. That we don't know how predictive this is going to be, because there were picks last year in camp, and secondary wasn't very good when they got in the regular season. That's not always direct translation, but there hasn't been a ton of interception production. I don't even know if there's been. I know there was a couple over the weekend. There was a couple on Friday and a couple on Sunday, I believe. But most days there haven't been any. And there was one or two opportunities today, ball up in the air. Like, really would have been a tough play for Tyler Owens. Like one of those where it gets deflected and he's just kind of hits him off the chest because he wasn't expecting the ball to hit him right there. He's getting ready to make a tackle. All of a sudden, ball deflects off the receiver right into him, and it's such a bang bang play that it would have been a hell of a play if he made it. But you can see by his reaction, not like, "Oh man, I wish I had gotten that." He's like, "Oh no!" Like that's. I wonder if in his mind, even as a UDFA, he's like, "Man, if I had made that play, like, do I make the team?" Like that's the kind of intensity that they place on ball production. And even though they haven't had a chance or haven't executed on picking a bunch of balls off, you see today the way they hunt the football. You see it with the intentionality of punching the ball out, and you get some execution of actually doing it on, by the way, including Zach Ertz, a veteran player who certainly knows better and is a guy that is going to second nature protect the ball, and that it's hard to do. And Frankie Louvu did it anyway.
Yeah, and I think, that kind of thing, it's annoying as an offensive player that they're always trying to punch the ball out, but it makes you better. It makes you more cognizant of the ball and like where you are. And I remember going through a phase in my career where I was having an issue with it, and you realize like what you can and can't get away with. And so I think it's nice that they are forcing the offense to place an emphasis on it right now. So I think that's great. And, you kind of said something else there about the ball production and lack of interceptions. I think today they were putting in a lot, because you kind of said today's like third and long, second and long emphasis.
Yeah, so they did. Dan described it beforehand as they would do a second and long drill. So 2nd and 7+. Yeah. And if the offense got the first down, and it would be at least 2 plays, right? So if the offense got a first down on the first play, cool, they get off the field, they win the drill, or they win that round of the drill. If not, let's say it's 2nd and 7, to use the same exact example that Dan used. 2nd and 7, you get a 3-yard gain. Now it's 3rd and 4. We're going to play the 3rd and 4 live. And so that's kind of the setup for a big, long chunk of the practice today.
Yeah. And so I think on some of that second and long stuff, you were seeing some more complicated defensive fronts, some more complicated defensive disguises. And I think those complexities, I think, sometimes prevent true ownership of a scheme, right? It's the same thing you see with like an offensive install, where you are putting in something really complicated that you like a lot. But because it's complicated, the formation's a little bit different, the motion's a little bit different, the timing's a little bit different, the spacing's a little bit different. You don't get true ownership. And I felt like the defense looked sharp today. Like, I think there was some really good things they did. They got a lot of pressure. There was a couple sacks. Like, I'm not saying this is bad, but you're not going to get interceptions when you're playing and when you're thinking the way the group was thinking today. Because again, it's new. It's relatively new. It's the first day, at least we've seen or I've seen stuff like this. And obviously we'll talk about the offensive explosive plays here in a little bit. There seemed to be a bunch of them. But I think some of those plays are also explained through this idea that like they're still figuring out. Like, like for example, there was a blitz on, they're checking a Tampa 2, but they're all lined up right near the line of scrimmage, and it's hard to kind of buzz to your new assignment, and so there's going to be space and air, and great job by the quarterback finding that space and air. But I think it's great because the defense is stressing themselves with install, the offense is stressing themselves with install, and that's sometimes when you see a little bit of like maybe explosive plays or a lack of something you're expecting to see with regards to the interception. So I think it's good that that's happening, and I would expect that ball production to come sooner rather than later, because I think as they start to own these schemes a little bit better, they're going to be more productive, and they're going to kind of embody what we've seen already in terms of fumbles and stuff that we've shown the past couple of days.
Yeah, for sure. And that there definitely was more of that today. And one of the kind of telltale signs is we saw Frankie Louvu everywhere. And I talked to Louvu about this after practice yesterday, and he like really lit up. If people want to watch the interview on YouTube, and I started to ask him about his role and carving out kind of the Frankie Louvu position, and he's like, "Yeah, man, it's been really fun because he has been on the edge." And we saw today in the 2-minute situation, the number one edge rotation for today. We don't know what this will be during the season, but for today, it was like Payne Allen in the middle with Frankie Louvu at left end and Dante Fowler on the right end. And when Dan has talked in press conferences about the role that he wants for, say, Jamin Davis, it's that exact thing, a 2-minute edge player where it's a pure pass rush situation, and they're gonna let Louvu cook in those situations. And you saw the burst and the explosiveness, and it's a really great test for guys like Brandon Coleman on the offensive line to deal with that kind of athlete, that kind of body type. And I think the O-line did a pretty good job. The offensive production in those 2-minute situations was pretty good today. I think they ultimately won the drill all 3 times. One of which we'll talk about. The Mariota section was that was funky. But ultimately, like, the defense or the offense did a good job. But to see Louvu move around that much, to be lined up in the A gap, to line, and then to sometimes pop back in his zone, sometimes to blitz, sometimes to be lined up at the edge, like, that's a telltale sign this defense is starting to come together, because you're starting to see some of these different players in these different roles and move around like we know based off of Dan and Joe's history that they're going to in the regular season.
Yeah, we can't talk too much about scheme, but they did really make a concerted effort to kind of maximize him in those different positions, which is also cool to see. So, like, I've loved the past couple of days offensively and defensively, because there just seems to be such a deliberate nature to the defensive scheme and the offensive scheme. I mean, we talked about the red zone in the last podcast a little bit, but you saw that today. Like, there was a play design today by the offense where I was like, man, that's fantastic. And it's great to see them doing the same thing defensively. And it feels like very refreshing, I think, to kind of see two coordinators and two, offensive and defensive staffs that are pushing that envelope a little bit. And you talk about Frankie Louvu, but it's also cool to see how they're using, some of these other chess pieces in the back end. Percy's playing dime linebacker sometimes, or Revo's playing dime linebacker. And they've got this great rotation. They've got the nickel guys kind of in a very specific coaching group, and how specific they've been with the nickel. And I love that, because it's its own position. It's not a safety. It's not a corner. You're playing nickel. And how often did we see, in the last regime that they even made that a point of emphasis? So I love the flexibility, the diversity that we've seen from both groups. It's great to see Louvu kind of in that role. And again, like today, you talked about the explosive nature of some of the offensive plays. I also think today there was some explosive defensive plays that aren't going to show up for the fan. And what I mean by that is, like, they brought some pressures where there's free runners, guys are winning quick one-on-ones. Like, Frankie Louvu had a nice rush. I forgot on who it was. Or no, it was Andre Jones in the threes, and would have, like, smoked the quarterback, but has to pull up. Ball is completed for a big play. Crowd goes crazy. But, like, the defense has done some stuff from a blitz pressure standpoint that in training camp, I know it's frustrating for defensive people who like defense, that hasn't shown up. So lots of good things. And again, like, it's good that they're going back and forth with each other, but it's been really refreshing for me to go out and watch practice and be like, oh, that's a really cool disguise, or that's a really cool pressure, or that's a really cool stem to a pressure, then get to coverage. So, and then the same thing with the offense, just in terms of how they've used they had a really cool thing with some personnel stuff today that I thought, wow, that's going to present some problems for guys in season. And it's subtle little things, and the fact they've got so much diversity in is really cool. So I know that's a little bit of a tangent, but that was kind of elaborating on your point.
No, but I think the larger point to tie it all together is it's starting to come together. We're starting to finally, like, today was the first day that I was like, oh, I feel like I know what's going on here. And a lot of it was just so isolated, because it's like, oh, well, this is their 2-minute stuff. Okay, this is their this is their red zone stuff. This is whatever. And, like, today you start to see some of the pieces come together in a way that I hadn't yet. And that's refreshing for me personally to hear that you feel the same way, because maybe I'm not as far behind as I thought. But to just kind of see it all come together, I thought was very cool. Also, on your offense, defense, it won't show up to the average fan. Your moment of levity today brought to you by Ryan Clark. RC and the Pivot crew were at practice, and Ryan came over to the fans and was like, why do y'all only cheer for the offense? It was after Jaden hit a big play. And he's like, come on, man. Like, why can't y'all cheer that loud for the defense? What are we doing? Everyone just loves offense around here. Defense wins championships. And so it was really, really funny. RC kind of playing back and forth with the crowd. But Also, I heard that you should have, if you're a fan of like good in-depth interviews. I think they're talking to Zach Ertz and Austin Eckler on the pivot. So look forward to that in the next next week or two. Is what I was told. But anyway, that was fun, and it is true because there are times where it's like, oh, that was a sack, but it was also a touchdown to the fans or to most people watching because they didn't see the guy pull up in the pass rush. That said, there were some legitimate offensive explosive plays today. And I think my favorite thing from today was there was an attempt at an outside go ball for Terry from Jaden. And the throw was off a little bit. It was a little bit high, a little bit outside. Terry had Forbes and the safety beat. But the throw had to be like a high and outside to be away from those two players. But Jaden just missed it by a little bit too much. And they come back to the sideline, and Terry and Jaden are talking a pretty intense conversation, like clearly productive. It wasn't like they were yelling at each other. It was just like, no, I want this here, I want that there. And I can't, we're not close enough to say who was telling who what, but they were clearly like hashing it out and getting on the same page. And then sure enough, they come back probably 5 minutes later and hit the same exact, deep down the left sideline. I don't know if it was the same play. I don't know if it was the same route, whether, one was like a double move, whatever, because I wasn't watching Terry in that moment, but they hit the big one. And the joy that those two had of doing that, of like, yeah, we fixed it. We got on the same page. You put the ball where I wanted, or Terry, ran the route where Jaden wanted. Whatever fix they made, they hit it. And to see that communication, to see that camaraderie, and then to see ultimately the ability to execute the thing, that's the kind of stuff that brings you joy, Logan, because it might mean we get to watch some good football this year.
Yeah, no, that is really cool. And I don't know if it was the play that you're talking about, Craig, but it was like a deep post, and they had cleared it out really well, and there was someone holding the opposite side corner, and they just kind of sailed it. And so again, for them to come back and kind of make those connections later on in practice was cool. It was also cool, I think, to see Zach kind of continue to be involved, but also Jahan, kind of coming alive today in practice, doing some stuff. And we've kind of been speculating about like what his role is going to be and like what his usage is going to be. And I thought he did a lot of good stuff from multiple different alignments that I think will kind of best speak to his skill set, which I think is going to be really cool. So I think the whole thing kind of came alive. I loved, there was a keeper today, a boot out action where Jaden is rolling to the offensive right. There's a little bit of pressure. Great job by Cole Turner kind of sealing the edge off there. And it's a comeback and everything's covered up, but like good job by Jaden kind of sitting on the throw, throwing it early. Beautiful spiral, anticipating the spot to OZ for a nice big completion, toe tap on the sideline. And it just was kind of cool to see OZ, to see Jahan, to see Terry kind of with that first group, quote unquote, because we don't really know groups just yet, but kind of spark a little. And just, again, Jaden just makes it look kind of easy and makes the timing and the anticipation kind of look like what it needs to be. So I think it was cool that not only did Terry and him get on the same page, but also it seemed like other people we're kind of following along. And this was definitely the most kind of dynamic day for the offense, I would say, as a whole.
Yeah.
Which is good to see. Austin Eckler had a great run kind of up the middle of the field, made a guy miss. Would have been for a big play. B-Rob had a couple of big runs also. So it was cool to see the offense kind of clicking on all cylinders today, and the chemistry that seems to be developing not only with Terry but throughout that entire group.
Yeah, Jahan, I'm glad you mentioned him because I got one in my notes a lot today, where there a couple of really great plays. There's the one in the 2-minute situation that kind of got that drive going. That you
love that play design, by the way.
Yeah, you wound up drawing that out for me on my notepad here.
Yeah, we can't talk about it,
but
it was
picture
good.
of it so you can remember.
I remember it now because if I draw something down, I can remember it. But yeah, it was just such a creative way to get to like a kind of like a day one install concept, like this little tricky high low with a nice pull out, and it was just like, ooh, this is sweet. And so I get fired up for stuff like that.
Yeah. Jaden delivers a dime on it. My favorite play of the day involving Jahan, though, was there's pressure. And Jahan is running his route, and he's just so patient. And to the point that I almost wonder if he was too patient. And the fact that Jaden and has such great escapability kind of bails him out. But then Jaden it's really more about Jaden than Jahan. Just an unbelievable ball on the sideline, probably about 20 yards. He's rolling to his right. John's on the right sideline, and he's got to get it up over a defender and then back down to Jahan.
Yeah.
And just the perfect layering on the run. Just it may be the best throw that we've seen from Daniels. He's made a couple of great ones, including today, like the deep ball accuracy, just spectacular. But that throw is like next level special. And I think the thing that really struck me about it, Logan, was how easy he made it look. Like the fact that he just continuously never looks stressed is really somewhat absurd, frankly, for a rookie. Nevertheless, impressive.
Yeah, very calm. And in addition to that play, he had one where they're getting a little pressure. He throws a early back shoulder to Jahan that ends up getting completed. Might have been like a predetermined comeback on like a box fade type thing, but
yep,
like just the anticipation of that throw was great. And again, like it's great to see him be calm, cool, and collected. Some of these were kind of borderline. I think a couple of those there might have been some free rushers and stuff that you're kind of just playing through the down as the quarterback, which is awesome. But yeah, I don't want to overhype him because I know fans like to hear one positive thing and they're like, "Oh my God, he's Peyton Manning." He's doing a good job, and it's been impressive to watch him make plays out there. And the maturity and the professionalism that he's shown, I definitely think is setting him up for a really good the opportunity to have a good season. I think the thing that I'm probably most excited to watch is the joint practice coming up. We're not going to get to watch it, but joint practice preseason, how they look against Miami, those are going to be huge tests because those are insanely complex defenses, and both those, Miami and New York, are very complicated. And so if they're getting blitz periods in practice, if they're getting different coverage structures than 7-on-7, like how does he handle that stuff? And if he's kind of weathering those storms well and keeping the same poise, like, man, like, and he just keeps building on what he's done every single day at training camp, it's an exciting opportunity for the Washington Commanders and this fan base and this team and this organization. So really stoked. But again, I want to just say, man, like, he's doing a good job. We're excited, but we're not playing like real football just yet. So
yeah, for sure. Meanwhile, the other groups offensively, so they end practice in 2 minutes, and the two different situations. Daniels was actually in with the ones, and that was like a true ones. It was from Daniels to the 1-0 line to the one receivers, one tight ends, etc. It's one of the first times that we've even seen that. Normally there's some kind of mixing and matching, right. But 50 seconds on the clock, it's 28-24, and they're got 35 yards and need to score a touchdown, and they crush it. They started with that play that we talked about earlier to Jahan, and ultimately it ends on a 4th down touchdown to Zach Ertz. So good job out of Jaden and the crew there to get it in. They were very silly dancing afterwards. So that was fun watching the guys show that joy. And then Marcus comes in, and he's got the 2-0 line, and he's got the backup receivers. And my drive summary for that one, Logan, is penalties, BS, Tremaine for 60.
Yeah. And
that's which I only mentioned because I want to talk about Bryson Tremaine / I want to let you talk about Bryson Tremaine.
Yeah, I mean, Bryson Tremaine is one of my favorite players on the roster currently, and I don't know if he's going to make the team or not. I have no insight on that, but if he keeps doing what he did today and he keeps doing what he's done the first 5 days of training camp, I think he's going to be all right. So it's basically like they are using him, at least to my eye, approximately like, or what would approximate like an X receiver, kind of like your isolation guy on the ball. And they've been getting in these formations, kind of stuff we talked about, we saw in Arizona, where it's, they find ways to get that player good one-on-one matchups versus man coverage. And he's delivered. I think he had 2 deep fade balls today where he beats the cornerback. One of them was a tremendous catch, like full out sprawled.
Yep.
Catching the ball against his face mask, belly flop on the ground, gets up and continues to run afterwards. Yeah, the guy beat so bad. The other one was kind of a high top, over the top catch, on the sideline. And he, to me, is so unique because not only did he do that, but then he goes to special teams, and Jordan McGee is trying to block him in a hold up punt drill. And he's like basically playing guard on punt team and is able to get a release off of a linebacker. So he's 6'4.5", 6'5", he's 220 pounds, but plays with tremendous strength. The way he runs routes is very, very sharp. And I think he's just giving himself every opportunity to make the 53. And so, we talked about guys that might have an advantage in this Cliff Kingsbury offense. And this started early for me when we were watching OTAs, and Jaden Daniels was like I trust this guy. He's in the right spots. That's a really good sign. When you have a quarterback that's studying the way Jaden Daniels is studying, and you have a receiver that he can just blind throw to spots, like that's a really good sign. And so that's what we've seen from Bryson Tremaine over the last 6 days. And today was kind of his coming out party from a vertical pass game attack. But every day, like he catches your eye. Special teams coverage drills, protection drills. When we're doing hold up stuff, we're doing kickoff coverage. Like he's a guy that has really done a good job of kind of separating himself out. And again, with plays like this, that's awesome. But he is one of one on the roster at the moment. There is nobody as big or as fast as him in that receiver room. So I think, again, it's early, so a lot of practice left. But if you're kind of doing your roster bingo card, like he's one that I would circle for sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna do a 53 on Wednesday's show. So I'll tell you right now, I'm gonna find a way to get him on the roster.
Right? I mean, it kind of feel like you're like he's the guy. He's been one of the more impressive players at training camp. Like
for sure.
Again,
he's
like,
also the only receiver they have over 6'1".
Yeah.
And so like it's not hard to justify keeping him. One is one of your better special teams players, like period.
Yeah.
2 is a unique guy in the receiver room. 3, he's been a damn good receiver in camp.
Yeah.
And he was pretty good last year too. I know this staff doesn't know. I mean, well, that's actually another thing though, is Bobby Ingram does know that. Like the wide receivers coach was here last year and very much knows that. And so that is something that potentially works in Tremaine's favor. Speaking of special teams, though, Logan, let's wrap up with talking a little bit of teams, which is what everybody comes to every single football podcast for, is give me the special teams review. But they do really work on a ton of team stuff, whether it's punt coverage, kick coverage, and how you cover those two plays is now in some ways more similar than it's been in the past. Some of the technique work and things like that. They added in, they had a good field goal period today. Worth saying that the kicker, who really struggled over the weekend, had a perfect day today, including a situational kick game winner in the 2 minutes, 2 minute late. But I also think that there's some guys starting to emerge from the return game. When we talk about making a 53, Mike Sainer still potentially being the punt and or kick returner changes the math in a major way. And then also today you have the kind of, I don't know if it's confirmation. I don't really know what sparked this going around the league, but everyone's like, yep, no onside kicks until the fourth quarter. It's got to be the team that's trailing. So that was special teams is kind of trending in the league today, but I think it's better to just keep it, at home here in Ashburn or at home with the Commanders. What have you seen, if anything, from some of these special teams drills, guys that have stood out, or the way they're organized in terms of preparing this team for the regular season?
Yeah, I mean, I really, again, I'm going to sound like I'm gushing here, but I really like what they've done. I think they've emphasized special teams in a good way. I think Izzo's done a good job of selecting drills, emphasizing it. And one of the things, the other thing I like about it is it really helps me, helps people watching evaluate the roster, because you can see with the drills he's picked the guys that are good at teams. And I think that's been awesome to see. Like, to see that one-to-one corollary is really, really cool. So I like the coverage drills they've used. I like the kind of block destruction technique drills they've used. It feels very practical while also kind of saving legs. And I think it's smart. It kind of goes in line with the things we've seen on offense, right? It's like, it's smart offensive play install. It's smart defensive play install, innovative stuff. And I like the structure of practice. I think the thing I'm kind of most excited to see when it comes to the first preseason game and joint practice is what is the wrinkle that they choose to select on in terms of special teams. Like, nothing has jumped out to me yet, but that new kickoff rule, like, I'm curious to see what teams start doing with it. Like, you have some flexibility there, and for me, like I was thinking about the other day, it's like, why not employ kind of some single wing principles where there's kind of like a zone read in the return to kind of set up some double teams and get ball action some different ways, because you can do that now, because you can plan for a return every single time. So I'm just curious to see what he does. They've been very covetous of that. Like, I'm sure you've been out there. You can't record anything from that first special teams period, because they're trying to kind of figure out what they want and who they want to be, which is great. I love that they're kind of trying to keep that competitive advantage as well. So that's something, when it's time to do it in the game on whenever that is against the Jets, what does that actually look like? And I know it's going to be the most simplified version of what they want, but at least you give you an idea of what they're thinking. So overall, I think I've been pretty impressed with this teams. I think they've, again, the three coordinators have done a great job, and they've done a great job of kind of keeping Dan's vision. And I think special teams is just an extension of that. So.
Yeah, I definitely think that the thing to continue to watch in camp, just because as you start to do the numbers, things get real dicey, is the return game. And
even when you said Mike Sanderson, I was like, yeah, dude, he's looked great. But I was like, are you going to put your starting nickel on multiple return spots? You know what I'm saying? Like, I know he's been good at it, but like, it seems like he's such a big part of this defense and this defensive perspective. Like, it'd be kind of risky. It'd be kind of like putting Jahan back there.
So this is kind of a question though, is on the kickoff return side of it, especially punt return is punt return. It's dangerous. Like, dudes are flying 60 yards down the field or 50 yards down the field full speed. And if you get crunched by one of those dudes, yikes. But on kickoff, like, it's kind of an offensive, like, it carries the same danger in a way as an offensive play. And so if that's the case, like, and it's worth an offensive play, and especially if you think you can generate explosives off of it, is it worth it? Like, that really is the question, right? I don't say is it worth it in like a self-answering kind of way. It's like, is it worth it? Obviously not. Like, I actually wonder, is it worth it? If you can set up like what's essentially a game plan run, a big explosive potential run, and Sainer still is your best guy, I think that's one way to look at it. I think the other thing too, though, is like, you've got roster spots that you're trying to figure out. And if you have a guy whose sole purpose is to return kicks, that's kind of a waste of a roster spot at this point.
Yeah.
And that becomes the problem for a guy like Kaz Allen. That becomes a question for a guy like Jamison Crowder. If you would you rather keep Bryson Tremaine, multifaceted receiver and special teamer on multiple units, or Jamison Crowder return punts? And that might be the question that they're asking. And I think I'd rather keep, as much as I love JC and think he's a good punt returner, the data suggests he's actually wasn't, outside of one or two big returns, he actually wasn't that much more effective than a guy like Dax Milne was last year. I know people are going to be stunned to hear that, but the numbers are the numbers. And so do you think it's just worth it to put Sainer still back there, or put Jahan back there, or put Emmanuel Forbes back there? They've got some other guys, and open up that roster spot for whether it's Tremaine, whether it's your 12th DB, who's also a multi special teams unit guy. Like, it becomes really hard to justify, with this much talent floating around and this many positions that are overloaded, a guy who's basically there to return punts.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think all the guys you just described, I'd be perfectly fine with any of them returning punts. You know, Mike Sanders still is your punt returner. Jahan, even Forbes, even if he ends up starting, I'd maybe give him a look. But I think the new kickoff rules are going to lead to a very different body type returning kickoffs. And I think that's the thing that I would kind of just keep an eye on. I don't think you're going to get your kind of jitterbuggy type guys on kickoff return. It's going to play like a downhill run. So at least in my mind, as of right now, like, the guys that I'm kind of watching are, Wiley, that UDFA running back, Chris Rodriguez, maybe Austin Eckler type guy back there, a guy who's got a very linear running style, who understands how, kind of like B. Mitch, B. Mitch was when he was playing. Like, we're not, no fair dodging, we're running downhill, I'm attacking this thing and forcing you to make a tackle. Like, I think those guys are going to be really effective here. And obviously you want an explosive playmaker, but I just think the stuff that you can do with some of, like, in my mind, is going to play like an offensive line trap play or a power play where we got two lead blockers on a pull, like that kind of stuff, I think is going to be really interesting to keep an eye on. And I just, again, it's the body type. It's the body type. I think you need someone a little bit hardier there. But in terms of punt return, yeah, I think, I'd love to see Sanders still return punts. I just think that would be fantastic, because even in the little drills like we've talked about, like, he is quick and he's kind of fearless and he's got, great vision. So that's more what I'm referring to. I don't know if you can get a guy anymore who can do both. And it was hard to do that before, but I think you're looking for two different styles maybe. And again, like, we'll see, maybe in the preseason, they're like, oh, here's Sanders still doing both and he looks great. So it's like, well, then I'll eat crow then. But as of right now, I think it's two different things.
Interesting. Definitely something to watch. Speaking of the first preseason game, a recap of that will be the next time you hear my voice on Take Command because I am off to France to go on a nice little trip and watch some people run in circles really, really fast at the Olympics. But have no fear. Logan will be here with Denton Day, so you will not miss your usual regularly scheduled episodes of Take Command. So just stay subscribed, or if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now. And Denton and Logan will be in your feeds next week, and then I'll be back as soon as I am back from France, and we will talk about the Commanders' first preseason tilt. For Logan, I'm Craig. Have a good time. Bon voyage to me, and au revoir. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.